Welcome again to Designing and Using School Grounds to Support Mental Health for Children, Young People, Teachers, and the Community. Our first speaker today is Kerry Logan, the Executive Council member of the ISGA. Did you wave yet, Kerry? Hello. And Kathrin with Touchscreen. Agnieszka with NeuroLandscape. And Claire with Cal Poly Pomona. All right, I'm handing it over to you, Kerry. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Now we're on a really tight schedule, so I'm going to read my little introduction. Yes, my name's Kerry Logan. I've been involved in the play sector in one role or another for the past 20 years or so. In welcoming everyone to Perth in Western Australia, I'd like to take a quick moment to acknowledge that I come to you from the land of the Whadjuk people, part of the Noongar Nation, the traditional custodians of this place that I also call home. My day job is with a local business specialising in the design and building of nature-based play spaces, working across the early childhood education and local government settings. My unpaid jobs include being on the National Board of Play Australia, the national peak body for play, and I'm also part of the Executive Council with ISGA, as Jamie just said. I'm keen to hear our two speakers today, so I don't want to talk for too long, but I would like to quickly introduce the ISGA for those that don't know about us. Established in 2011, we're a global network of organisations and professionals all working to enrich children's learning and play by improving the way school grounds are designed and used. Excuse me. Our work represents both the diversity of our membership and the wide range of issues and topics that intersect within education and care settings. I first became aware of the ISGA through the 2015 conference in Bali. And our conferences certainly provide a great opportunity to share knowledge, showcase exemplars in design and practice, and of course support each other, particularly those working on their own or in difficult circumstances. As an ex-playground safety inspector, I was quickly drawn to join the Beneficial Risk Working Group and proud to promote, I've forgotten to do our little slide progression, pardon me, the statement on risk in play and learning. It's I think it's a really succinct and powerful statement calling for common sense in risk management in schools. If you work in education, I recommend the expansive International School Grounds Month Activity Guide. It includes contributions from members around the world, and it's a great resource with something for every year, every school year, every climate and every setting. You're going to all find lots of information on our website as well. Lastly, a quick plug for our next conference, postponed from this year for obvious reasons. All the details are on the LTL website, Learning Through Landscapes website that is on the screen now. Now I'm going to hand you over to Kathrin, who's going to introduce the topic for today's session. Enjoy.
Thank you, Kerry, and a very good morning from Singapore. My name is Kathrin Schmiele. I'm a landscape architect and trained as a nature and environmental educator. With my consultancy firm Touchscreen, I literally get children and young people in touch with green because I advise on the design of green school grounds and associated outdoor play and education practice here in Singapore and in Asia. And as a council member of International School Ground Alliance, I am pleased to introduce you to the topic of this webinar, Designing School Grounds to Support the Mental Health of Children and Young People. A growing research body recognizes the positive impact of a green environment for the overall healthy development of our children. But reality shows children spend less time outdoors, but too much time in front of any screens because of an increasing trend of digitalization. And besides the positive effects of being connected to friends and the world and to homeschooling activities, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there is more than ever a high risk of physical inactivity, social isolation, and other related diseases when screen time management is poor. Children are often even disconnected to nature, especially when they grow up in high-density areas. And cities, they expand rapidly, not only here in Asia. The question is how children and their overall needs can be better reflected in city planning policies and in educational systems. Since children spend most of their active daytime in schools, we believe that school grounds can play a crucial role in the process of connecting children with the natural world. Meaningfully designed school grounds and kindergartens can be biodiverse spaces of ecological value. They can provide shade and an enjoyable microclimate for children and young people to be in. In such environments, they can play, mingle, and explore. They can apply scientific understanding. They can gain hands-on skills and creativity, all activities that go beyond the knowledge transfer inside the classroom. Such designed schoolyards can decrease stress levels and support mental health on a daily basis. And we will hear that in depth from our two researchers presenting in this webinar soon. School grounds can also play an important role in mitigating COVID-19 social distancing measures because they provide valuable space and various opportunities outside school buildings. Many schools and kindergartens haven't yet recognized this fact. With the following video, we would like to introduce you to green school grounds and related activities from all over the world, celebrating inclusion and diversity. And I think these examples show it depends on the passion and the determination of stakeholders, educators, designers, and the school community to make the most of our school grounds for our children. So after the video, I would like to hand over to Agnieszka to share her insights of the research. And so please lean back, grab your coffee or your tea or your water and get inspired. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathrin. That was really amazing slideshow, very inspiring. My name is Agnieszka Olszewska Guizzo. I'm very happy I was invited to this panel. Thank you very much for organizing this very important panel. And welcome to all attendees. Thank you for joining us today. So my presentation will be about the research and design insights to the design of the mentally healthy outdoor spaces for children. It will be quite a scientific oriented presentation. It will build on some literature examples, but also my own neuroscience research. I would like to thank specifically Weronika Gąsior from our team, who is our mom on board, NeuroLandscape. Thanks, Veronika, for also being here despite the very late hour in Europe. Okay, Okay, I will first touch upon some experimental research that is part of the systematic review by the expert group from the ECLIPSE mechanism, where we selected and filtered out some very important and relevant, good quality studies that talk about beneficial types and components of green spaces for children. And also I will introduce some of my own research using the neuroscience tools. And of course, I will try to extract some design implications of our possible interventions. So first of all, we have to note that the early childhood environmental exposures impact the life and mental health and well-being throughout the life. The exposures, even in the prenatal phase, the environmental exposure that mothers experience can impact the neurodevelopment of child. And then the early childhood exposures can shape up, decrease or increase the quality of life, mental health and well-being. Also, depression that is in the adult age or adolescent age can increase the risk to develop other neurodegenerative mental health disorders, such as dementia and Alzheimer. So all that is actually connected, and we should see holistically how the exposures, adverse environmental exposures throughout the life can really have detrimental impact on our mental health. And here, exposure to nature is one of these beneficial environmental exposures, and it has been already described by scientists in the meta-analysis that is presented here. We can see that the high levels of green space presence in the childhood is increasing, improving the mental health. In a way, it reduces the risk of the development of psychiatric disorders in the later life. It is also seen that even a passive exposure, where in the very early childhood, can significantly improve the mental health. What we could be interested to achieve through the outdoor space design for children is to reduce their inattention and increase their attention patterns so that they could score better at school and learn better. So this study from Norway suggested they measured many different parameters of the green space that's outside of school. They measured the area, the amount of shrubs, trees, hills, sky view, and the integration between vegetation patches. And they found out that significantly improving the attention patterns in children are the large tree patches, shrubbery, and hilly terrain. This points at the theory that all landscape architects should be familiar with, which is called savanna preference theory, that suggests that evolutionary humans are hardwired to prefer, to feel more comfortable in savanna-like landscapes. And when we look at our typical parks designs, urban parks designs, they also usually possess this characteristics of savanna, which is the open grassland where we can see far distance, with tree patches and shrubs patches with some defined edges to them. Another interesting thing that the study observed was that actually attention can decrease with the longer stay outdoors. So it may not be that the longer the outdoor stay, the better for the attention. It could actually be more important to provide the frequent and regular stay outdoors rather than these that take a long time. Going back to the hilly terrain, that's the first design strategy, the first design tip. There's just something about mounds that make us want to interact with that space, and it has been already introduced in many different playgrounds, that the diverse landform and the natural asymmetry introduced through the terrain, it's really important to create this very natural feel to the landscape. Another thing that we may want to be interested in providing for the kids is to reduce their problematic behavior and regulate emotions. So in a number of studies, it has been found that, of course, there are social issues that play a role here, just such as mother's education. It has been found that these effects are more pronounced in children with mothers of lower education level. But in general, the residential greenness and proximity to child's residence might result in a better childhood emotional status. So it is not really the trait of design of the outdoor space of the schoolyard, but rather it points again at the environmental exposure and nature that should be a background to everyday life. It has been also found that the preschoolers improved most in behavior and self-regulation when their homes were surrounded by plentiful tree canopy. The trees is a very important element of the landscapes, especially mature trees are very symbolic. They have even a symbolic archetypal meaning. We recognize the trees as dominant in the landscape, and children definitely recognize them as a very imaginative type of play. Weeping willows can provide a hideout, and a lot of different things can be done with the trees, fruits, leaves that those trees provide. Also, they provide a lot of shade. Another thing that has been studied is the quality of life, and here studies are not conclusive as to whether the accessibility, proximity of nature predicts the health-related quality of life. So it seems that it's the mere accessibility of nature may not be enough, and rather the quality of this nature and the nature exposure could play a role. It has been found here that the tree patches and patches further apart from each other have created this significant effect for the quality of life in children. When it comes to specific types and components of landscape, again, mature trees, regularly shaped landscape, sufficient openings and closings of the views, and clearly defined edges. that points again at the savanna-like preference, savanna-like landscapes. And therefore, this small photo of Teletubbies, this is the land, they live in the land that very much like, is very much like the savanna. Also, the studies found that the urban versus rural children have different sensitivity to this nature exposure, and that's most likely dictated by the experiences they have and their sensory stimulation they are used to. That points out to some more spontaneous type of vegetation that is usually often lacking in the cities versus the rural areas. It is very useful and very important to leave some plants to go as they would grow naturally. Don't mow the lawn. Leave the trees to drop their fruit and leaves on the ground and let children play with that. Going a little bit towards the brain and neuroscience perspective, the childhood is a very important stage of life where all the neural pathways are forming, and it's considered up to 19% of the child's brain is developing before the age of 5. However, our education system is designed so that it mostly involves the left hemisphere of the brain. It's the hemisphere responsible mostly for the analytical thinking, processing high amounts of information, while the right side of the brain is responsible for intuitive thinking, creative thinking, and this side of sides of the brain should be balanced in the process of education. And it's also important, and it's also interesting, that the nature exposure is inducing and balancing out over processing left hemisphere of the brain. So the right side of the brain is more active when we are calm, relaxed, and or exposed to nature. Next slide. Okay. In my studies, even though I was mostly scanning the brains of adults in different parks and gardens, in different urban spaces as well, I think a lot of my research applied also to children, probably even more so, because what I am studying are the passive exposures to different types and components of landscapes, trying to find out which are those specific types and components that are triggering the positive, beneficial brainwave activity. In my research, I came up with the so-called contemplative landscape model that consists of 7 key components of the landscape view, which unfortunately I don't have time to go too much in details with them, but it's mainly about layers of the landscape, so how deep we can see into the view. Then the landform, and again here it's some of the savanna is popping up with the undulating natural lines and forms. Then the vegetation, color and light, compatibility, archetypal elements, which one of them is the mature tree, and character of peace and silence. So I have found that not all nature exposure is generating the same brainwave activity. There can be more or less stimulating positive effects exposures. So here is an example. We can see in the first plan the quite normal, I would say, standard playground, but I would say this playground is providing highly valuable nature exposure, and not because the the equipments are made of natural materials, but rather that the views that are surrounding this playground provide this contemplative, passive, subconscious exposure to nature. We can see the defined edge of the tree patch and the hilly landform, the open space, and the quite long distance view. These trees are changing seasonally, and they will provide a lot of like stimulation, and the cycle of seasons will be visible here. So in the end, it is quite a healthy playground. To conclude, I would like to have some major points. So the first of all, nature exposure in children is very important to shape their mental health and well-being for the rest of their life, until late adulthood and elderly age. Nature could play, it would be already a lot if nature could be a background to any other activity that children have in the outdoor space at their schools. And most playgrounds actually have that potential. Landscape architects know a lot of tricks and strategies to implement that healthy views, healthy environmental exposures into the virtually any outdoor space. Also, from the research, it seems that the frequency and quality of nature exposure can be much more important than the duration of the stay. Specifically in the urban areas, the tips for design that will definitely generate some stronger effect as compared to rural areas, and also these things that are possible to implement in the urban areas are mature trees, preservation, planting, and just using their potential, giving access to them, even visual access. Then undulating landform, and that also means introducing some contemplative landscape features into the landscape views. At the end, I want to point out that this is just science, even though in our times, science is considered to be as close to truth as it gets. This is not entire picture, and for the decisions, the case-to-case scenarios have to be taken under consideration. So that's pretty much it. That's just science. Thank you very much for your attention, and please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box. Visit our website or send us email. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnieszka. Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Latané, and tonight my time, morning for a lot of you, I'm going to share lessons that I've learned over 16 years of practicing landscape architecture with a focus on schools and parks, and give you a little preview of a book I'm working on Schools That Heal, Design with Mental Health in Mind. More and more in education, focus is being placed on adverse childhood experiences and the likelihood that students have suffered trauma because of its lasting impacts. And it's important to understand that the symptoms of trauma and adverse childhood experiences are often invisible or misleading. Students might act out fear with anger or hyperactivity, or by completely checking out. While more and more young people open up about anxiety and stress, in many places and populations, mental health still remains a taboo subject and largely untreated. Education experts, for this reason, suggest more and more to treat all students as if they've struggled with adverse childhood experiences or trauma, because the likelihood is that they have. Our children and teenagers are under the added weight of trying to fix a world that we have let crash in on their futures. From climate change to gun control in the face of school shootings and daily neighborhood violence, to today's protests against police violence and in support of Black Lives Matter and a more equitable, just future. Research shows that school policing does not work to make kids and teenagers feel safer. In fact, it makes them feel less safe and actually less likely to go to college, especially for Black teenage boys. The physical environment that our students are going to don't support their mental health and well-being. In fact, they often do the opposite. As we've heard from Agnieszka, we know that there are qualities that can calm students, relieve stress, reduce heart rate, reduce the likelihood of students acting out in disorderly conduct and crime, and help students show up ready to learn. Schools can be designed as restorative environments like these that help students feel safe. The design strategies that I'm going to share were developed for existing urban schools, but they can be used in any school. And these are based on 50 years of research in environmental psychology, health, and landscape architecture. They can be grouped into 3 themes: nurture a sense of belonging, provide natureful environments, and inspire awe. We'll start with nurture a sense of belonging. First, we need to conduct an inclusive design process. Despite the fact that students and teachers have the most at stake from their school design, they're rarely involved in the design process. The simple act of asking students and teachers what they experience and need at school gives us important insights into how schools are used and perceived, and it also helps students feel valued and heard, both vital ingredients in nurturing a sense of community and belonging in children and adolescents. No matter what age the students are, they know their campus and how it makes them feel and which places work and don't work. By listening to our students and teachers, we honor them, and we also learn from them what they really need and want. These exhibits were made by Cal Poly Pomona Master of Landscape Architecture students in partnership with 3 school communities this past semester. Next, we need to focus on creating welcoming and a welcoming entry and edges around school. This is the same school rebuilt after earthquake damage, and you can see which one feels more welcoming to the community and which one is described most often as a prison. Open entries with clear front doors convey a sense of welcome and certainty to visitors, students, and the greater community. It will also help visitors, community members, volunteers, and first-time students find their way in and feel welcomed. Once we're on campus, we need to organize spaces logically, make it easy for students and visitors to find their way around campus. This is an activity map for an existing high school showing high activity and noise zones in red, medium in yellow, and quiet in green. Students suffering trauma or sensory integration disorders or stress or anxiety need places that are quiet to restore their well-being, and they need smooth transitions between active places and quiet places. This is what that same campus might look like if it were organized with mental health in mind. And while we often don't have control over buildings and new building locations, we can organize outdoor spaces more thoughtfully based on this. Next, we need to honor students' lived experiences and histories. This could mean showcasing art or growing and serving food that reflects students' cultures or traditions. This joint use community garden at Fremont High School in Los Angeles invites community members in to work with students, harvest vegetables and fruits, and hosts events like free farmers markets, garden workshops, and community meals. And it works in conjunction with a new wellness center, one of several that have been placed in schools around the LA Unified School District. Honoring students' lived experiences also means understanding that not all students learn best by reading or lectures. So we can create experiential landscapes and places in schools for them to learn. This is a physics garden at Pomona College in Southern California, which allows students to feel and experience the physical forces they are learning about. You can see the teeter-totter and the swing in the distance, and this merry-go-round in the foreground that lets people play with centrifugal force. Even in the most natural settings, we need to find design opportunities to invite and welcome all abilities, ages, and experience levels. Universal design and accessible design should not mean no nature, and nature should not mean inaccessibility. And we need to create quiet places and cozy spaces. Again and again, students ask for places where they can go to de-stress. Students of all ages ask specifically for this, and yet most schools have nowhere to go. Small spaces away from activity can provide respite, as well as places to hold community circles for restorative justice, where students and teachers can repair the relationships with each other, and themselves and the greater world. Students rarely have enough places to sit. It seems like a simple issue, let alone lie down, walk, rock, and swing. So many schools look like this, with students standing between breaks or at lunch or skipping lunch because there's nowhere to eat. The scarcity of seating or anything else creates competition and hierarchy. And especially now after COVID-19, we need to provide plenty of seating opportunities to allow students to socially distance safely. This could mean hammock clusters where you sort of get this determined space, and also provide social opportunities as well as alone time. Or it could mean swinging. You can see these seniors and very small children swinging, and yet most schools have banned swings from the environment. Swings help us, all of us, get back into our bodies and de-stress and breathe and relax. The next theme is provide nature-full environments. Building equity on schoolyards includes equity between species. Make sure your design provides healthy places for birds, pollinators, and insects to live and thrive. And while you're at it, don't poison our children and youth. Chemical pesticides, herbicides, plastics, rubberized play surfacing, and other petroleum-based materials are toxic waste disguised as eco-friendly products. Avoid them. Design with nature to reveal or bring back natural processes. This was the site of a hidden spring 5 years ago on the Cal Poly Pomona campus. It was covered by irises and vinca, and the science department, some of whom had been teaching for 30 years, remembered something that looked like and felt like a creek. So they raised a little money from an alumni donor to reveal this system of seeps and springs along the base of this little hill. And it's become one of the students and faculty and administrators that use the building behind it, favorite spaces, with native plants inviting dragonflies and tadpoles and all kinds of creatures that used to inhabit this site. It's a place for learning. Kindergarten through 12th grade schools bring their students here, as well as the science department on campus. Big open areas make students feel less safe and correlate with more student crime and disorderly conduct. We need to place trees and gardens strategically where students can most benefit from them. Sharon Danks has been really active, who's on this in our audience today, with advocating for the California state standards to suggest that trees and gardens might be placed in schoolyards where children are instead of around perimeters. This high school in a neighborhood in Berlin was designed with the school students and the community with mental health in mind. Trees and gardens break up the large courtyard, and there are plenty of contemplative spaces. You can see it's very different from the previous high school image. Seating can happen along the low walls, boulders, steps, and platforms placed around the school grounds, and the schoolyard feels more like a garden than an empty yard where students are watched. The students love their school, and the community is invited to use the grounds on weekends and after school. And developing school grounds where the students are proud of and the community is proud of is a way to improve mental health and safety and sense of belonging. This high school in Fairfax County, Virginia, is built organized around several courtyards with classrooms and big windows looking out into the courtyards. Placing trees where students can see them from classrooms and cafeteria windows helps reduce stress during and after tests and boosts academic performance, as well as plans to go to four-year college. Of course, to be effective, we need to work with teachers and administrators to uncover windows. Too often, our school windows look like this, and it's often neglected point of conversation to ask teachers why and administrators why, so that we can remove grates and blinds and encourage those windows to be open. Provide natural experiences for experiential learning. This elementary school in Portsmouth, England, simply planted 2 rows of trees relatively close to each other, and actually on the left is a railroad corridor right next to it, to allow students to have the experience of walking through a woods. The rest of the school grounds, while appearing generous, is actually marsh, which is pretty common for schools to be built in relatively undesirable land places. So here's an idea from the East Coast of the United States. Nancy Strinisty's early spaces designed the Campbell Elementary School Wetland Lab to take advantage of soggy grounds and recreate a wetland habitat for children to explore and learn from. This image from a Berlin schoolyard shows children testing their balance, their strength, and agility in a schoolyard made completely with natural materials and actually carved by children with the help of an artist. The International School Grounds Alliance supports and created a declaration of risk, beneficial risk on school grounds, because it's so important that we give children opportunities for free play and testing their own limits. Lastly, we need to inspire awe by designing for wonder, beauty, and awe. Researchers at UC Berkeley, in a project called Project Awe, found that awe-inspiring experiences like sunsets, artworks, music, and grand nature improve our mental health and bring us together. In surveys, they found that 75% of what people answered bring them awe are natural phenomenon. Whether it's public art that speaks to different narratives to each different individual, or discovering tiny creatures on a school ground, during moments of stress or anxiety, these special places and moments become anchors to hold on to. They build place attachment, which in turn improves mental health and a sense of community and belonging. Students whose curiosity is sparked, who are inspired, awed, or simply comfortable are more likely to show up and ready to learn, which is ultimately what we want, for students to feel connected to their schools, and like they belong there and like they matter, something that students in too many of our schools and communities around the world don't feel. It was interesting the other day when we were preparing for this, how many on this call described their own community schools as feeling and looking more like prisons than places of learning. We can improve equity, build resilience to climate change, improve public health, and give students hope for a better future by designing schools with mental health in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire.
I'm waiting for some more questions. Does anyone have any questions? I don't think we've received one yet.
I'm pretty much sure everyone is like just, wow. That was fantastic. Yes. I've got lots of things noted and asterisked, and it was wonderful. Thank you both.
Yes, thank you both. Kathrin said that was somehow some technical difficulties, so I don't know that she's going to join us back up here again as part of our discussion. But so you're all stuck with us. The video will be available as a recording. We'll send it out afterwards.
And the presentation. So so this is
right. Yeah. Why don't you keep talking?
This was in case people were asking, hey, show us some more examples. And this is a school in Los Angeles, Eagle Rock Elementary School, that Jamie and Sharon are familiar with. Sharon actually gave quite a lot of advice while we were designing this school to improve stormwater management, but also mental health and well-being and activity level. Let's see if I can scroll through. And it's a typical 100% asphalt play area with all the trees and good stuff on the outside. So we designed this. You can see collaborators there on the right, Sharon Danks, and then Dr. Bevan Ashenmiller, who's an environmental economist, was the PTA president. Dr. Marcy Rainey, who's a kinesiologist, studied the schoolyard transformation before and after, and has a really good article out in Preventive Medicine, I believe. So this is before and after. And some of the findings were that students were much more physically active. This is like right after planting. You can see how tiny those trees are. And even very simple moves, because this is a relatively small project for removing asphalt and working with the school district. It was a $350,000 project, which to me sounds like a lot, but in school language is not very much. Even just this small row of trees, there's 2 there out of 5, gives a sense of separation and quite a little bit of respite for this one child walking through the space where all the activity is happening on the other side. This learning garden doubles as a play space. The children leap during recess. It just becomes this wild, beautiful look at how many different ways children can use play space. The mulch, there's a big mulch area around the back here. On the other side, that was specifically recommended by the principal because she knew that kids needed places to dig. And it became.
Sorry. We have now a whole list of questions.
We have a few questions.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't know, Kerry, or I would like you to, Claire, finish whatever you would like to describe about the slide, and we probably have enough time for a couple of questions that Kerry is going to choose while you're finishing up. Sorry about that.
No, I think this is just a really good example of multi-purpose design. You have place for a class, place to sit, place to learn, place to explore. And with this, and I think this answers Anna's question that I can just see in my chat box, the teachers had to agree to removing all the rules, playground rules, before Marcy's study, because she couldn't study the change in behavior with rules in place. So where there used to be zones that students were allowed to play in, before this was implemented, they got rid of all zones. And this has been shown to improve behavior, actually. Removing rules on the playground improves behavior. And the supervision, which you could see in the Berlin schools, you really can't see across the whole playground, and that is a good thing, because students then feel autonomous and in control of where they get to go and where they can see. And because plants, usually school budgets are tiny, and plants go in tiny and trees go in tiny, teachers have a good 3 or 4 years or 5 years to get used to how to keep track of students while the plants and trees grow in.
I like to talk to schools about the difference between supervision and surveillance. Yes, one doesn't mean the other.
That's a great point.
Yeah, they're not prison yards. These are not prisoners, so we don't need to keep them under constant surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lovely research project in New Zealand a few years ago where they, a university encouraged several primary schools, elementary schools, to get rid of their rules, or to at least evaluate and get rid of some. And the school that got rid of everything had the greatest improvement in behaviour. And yes, the zones is another thing. Some of our schools, yes, only this year group can play in this spot, as opposed to, as you know, we talk about zoning the school grounds into activity areas, you know, passive spaces versus active spaces, and let the children choose where they want to go based on what they want to do. And that's another great strategy. So policy was one of the key questions, I think. How do we sell it to schools? Hopefully it's sort of more or less self-evident. When the children's behaviour is better, a lovely colleague of mine, Emma Lawrence, is an occupational therapist and talks about the impact of stress on children's brains and, of course, their ability to learn. And if we provide these safe, nurturing, soothing spaces with opportunities for children to play and engage in something that they're interested in doing, everyone's stress levels are down and the behaviour levels, the negative behaviour decreases, and everyone can get back to the mission at hand in helping children learn. So sometimes it's you know, it's a simple strategy. Make the experience at school more calming and pleasant, and everything else falls into place. So it cuts down on a lot of time dealing with negative behaviour and giving teachers time back to teach.
Yes, and so it's not hard to persuade teachers, but here in the US, it's extremely difficult to persuade school districts. So there are people like Sharon and Jamie who are doing a lot of work in the US to provide tools and evidence from districts that have made the change. I was just talking to somebody, to Deanna Van Buren of Restoring Justice, Restoring Spaces, who works on restorative justice and decriminalizing space, and who basically said it's easier to get people to transform prisons into something else than it is for districts to. So I would love to have an easy, oh yeah, this is how you sell it to school districts. That's one of the reasons I'm writing that book, is because we need all the tools we can get to convince school districts, especially large ones like LA, Oakland, to do this wholesale. It's easier one by one school, but we can't afford to wait.
If I can add to that, just a side note, I've heard on one of the conferences that the policy is pretty much politics. So in the ideal world, having all the evidence is enough. But in the real world, unfortunately, there is much more things to meet up. So science can be quite an important tool to help with systematizing the knowledge and evidence to provide to policy makers, and especially teaming up with scientists, with medical people, with doctors, and letting researchers collect the data in the schoolyards, letting them run their interviews, questionnaires, to build the body of knowledge in this area that is still under research, actually, can be a great tool to make that change. From our Singapore perspective, I can tell that policymakers are interested in the research, and they are working together with scientists in many different aspects. I don't, and probably Kathrin knows more about the schools and the policies around the schoolyards. I'm more oriented at the parks and green spaces. But there are these links in some countries already established, and it seems that policymakers can reach to scientists to create this dialogue with them that can be helpful.
Yeah, I think policies are different between schools, of course. I would like to add on this, but it is more to see the potential of the green schoolyards. And I think if school communities have really seen the great potential that they can offer the children beyond the classroom, and that they really can take care of skills and all these beneficial impacts we have heard in this webinar, then I think it is possible to adjust policies. They are much on safety and on risk management, and risk belongs also to the experiences of children. They should even get this in schoolyards, so it's all manageable. And I think it is really to see the beneficial impact of green schoolyards and to really make a difference. And from there, you can really find the next steps, I think. Yeah.
Thanks to Agnieszka's research, and much like it, we're making steps.
I think we're nearly out of time, Jamie.
We are over time by a minute or so. Thank you all so much for joining us, both as presenters and attendees today. And I hope that you were stimulated with new ideas and more support for the work that you all do, and to advocate for the work that we're all encouraging with connecting kids to nature on their schoolyards where they are every day. So thank you for the panelists and the attendees. You will all receive a follow-up email with possibly some of the questions responded to, but also a webinar recording and some additional resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.